Welcome to The Call, an exclusive conversation hosted by the Chamber's Global Intelligence Desk. We're delighted you are able to join us. Please note the views of our guests today are not necessarily those of the Chamber, but we hope you will find those views as valuable as we do. Please feel free to put questions into the Q&A at any time, and we'll address as many as we can after the interview. Let's get started. Good morning, and welcome to The Call, brought to you by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce here in Washington. I am your host, Jay Sapsford, and this is a special rapid response episode on a developing story. And here is the question of the moment. How will the downfall of Syria's regime reshape the Middle East? After years of civil war, Syrian rebel groups have ousted President Bashar al-Assad. On Sunday, rebels seized the Syrian capital of Damascus, forcing Assad to flee to Russia and ending 50 years of his family's rule. Today, the rebel group HTS says it will establish a new government, and the fall of Assad leaves Syria in the hands of rebels with Islamist roots. Syria shares borders with Türkiye, Iraq, Lebanon, Jordan, and Israel, and has long been a player in the region's geopolitics. Some of Syria's neighbors will welcome the regime change, others probably aren't so sure. While the story is still unfolding, it does leave the business community wondering, what now? Here are the critical questions about the country's future. What are the goals of the HTS rebels who unseated Assad? What does this mean for Iran and the so-called axis of resistance? What about Türkiye, Israel, and the rest of the region? And what are the implications for the U.S. and for business? Here to unpack it all is our very own Jennifer Miel, Vice President of Middle East, Central Asia, and Türkiye at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Jennifer, welcome to The Call.
Thank you, Jay, and thank you for spending time on such an important issue today.
Well, let's talk about the importance of it. What are the implications of this in the grand scheme of this narrative in the Middle East?
The collapse of the Assad regime in Syria has been described as the falling and collapse of the Berlin Wall in the Middle East. These are hugely symbolic and significant events, which have surprised many in the world, some less surprised than others. But certainly it opens up a Pandora box of scenarios across the Middle East, some good, some troublesome. Those on the troublesome side would be the reemergence of ISIS or al-Qaeda style groups. And this HTS group has been designated a terrorist group. Its leader has a $10 million bounty on its head from the United States as a designated terrorist. On the other side, this is finally a chance for Syrian people to unite and have a democratic or more stable government. Syria is a multi-ethnic and multi-religious society, so extremely complex when you're looking at the territorial and refugee inflow and outflow implications of these events.
Let's take a look at the most recent developments. There's a lot going on here. We had overnight, we had some bombing, from what I understand.
Yes, Israel is trying to reestablish its presence in the region in a way that thwarts any Syrian aggression toward its own borders. Israel currently is occupying the Golan Heights, which has been officially annexed as part of the United States determination, but it's not internationally recognized. So the big question is, what is HTS position going to be toward the Golan Heights? Right now, they seem to be much more internally focused, given the collapse of the regime and that the need to consolidate power. But the narrative in the Syrian public has been to reclaim Arab lands, and they consider Golan Heights Arab lands. So it'll be very key to watch what type of statements HTS makes regarding the Golan Heights, and that will be a key to determining its frictions with Israel, in addition to what types of overtures Russia and Iran may make to the new government in Syria. Israel is trying to ensure that this Shia crescent that is coming from Iran over through Syria, Iraq, and into Lebanon is effectively erased. So there's no supply lines right now for Hezbollah, should Hezbollah wish to reemerge. And it's important to note that the Syrians, especially within this HTS group, were celebrating Hezbollah's demise and the death of its leader a few months ago.
Okay, if you've just joined us this morning, this is The Call, a regular video conversation in which we address geopolitical issues of our time. Today we are discussing the latest developments in Syria with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Jennifer Miel. If you have questions, please feel free to put them into the chat. Let's take a look at HTS and what it's doing right now. I understand they're trying to establish control of Damascus after there's been some looting overnight, and I just wonder how that's going and how firmly they have a handle on this situation.
So in Syria today, there was announced a new prime minister, which is the same governor of the Idlib province, which previously HTS and its civilian arm, SG, is going to be governing. And so there has been a smooth transfer of power in terms of Assad leaving, delegating to his prime minister now passing the torch to HTS's civilian leader. And then we're seeing a lot of Alawites, which is a sect from Bashar al-Assad and his family, cross the border into Lebanon. There also are Syrians returning to Syria from Lebanon, from Türkiye, but most of the Syrians of the Alawite sect are trying to flee because they're worried and trying to flee to Lebanon.
Okay, I wonder if we might be able to touch a little bit on Abu Mohammed al-Golani, and I apologize if I've mispronounced that, but he has Islamist roots, and he's not a very popular figure with particularly the United States, if I understand this correctly.
That's correct. He is Syrian. He was born in Saudi Arabia, as his father was working in the oil industry, and then moved back to Syria at a young age. And he joined the ISIS ranks through al-Baghdadi in Iraq. So he went to fight with the US, fight against the US in the early 2000s. And then when Syria had its civil war, he left from Iraq to Syria to bring the Islamic State to Syria. However, he then split with Islamic State and pledged his allegiance to al-Qaeda, and also then split from al-Qaeda into a more moderate extremist group. And then he continues to moderate. So, he continues to reinvent himself and his ideology. I think we can call him the Gatsby of jihadists. And he is right now pledging to do all the right things, ensure multi-ethnic and multi-religious state in Syria, be a leader for all Syrians. He has really polished himself and primed himself for this moment. And it will be telling to see what he does and how he speaks and acts to see if the United States would engage him and would consider taking sanctions off.
Now, you mentioned the Shia Crescent and the role of Iran here. What does this mean for the axis of resistance? Iran has been using Syria as its sort of channel to Hezbollah, and it's also part of the sort of alliance between Hamas and the Houthis in Iran. It just seems like this is really significant that Iran didn't do more to protect Assad.
Absolutely. This is the effectiveness of breaking the Shia Crescent. It's been obliterated for the time being. Iran will not have the ability to resupply Hezbollah in the way that it has, and same goes for the Houthis. They will also be weakened by this. There will be talks about how brittle the Assad regime has been, and should this have been advanced sooner, and also what this means for the incoming Trump administration and policy toward Iran. I think the Israelis will probably argue that Iran is a lot weaker than many people have thought, and their choice to not fight, which also was Russia's choice, and of course Syria's choice, will be very telling. And will Iran's nuclear facilities be the next target?
You mentioned Russia. I wonder, Assad was a key ally for Russia, and now that he is flown into exile, I wonder what this means for Russia's presence in the region, particularly that base in the Tartus region.
Yeah, there have been Russians leaving that base, and I think Israel has its eyes set on destroying that base as soon as possible. And Russia has said that they will remain a strong player in the region, but actions speak louder than words.
Okay, another big player in this is going to be Türkiye, who seems to have two overriding concerns here. You have refugees and you have Kurds. I wonder if you could touch on both.
Sure. So Türkiye is by far the biggest power player in this as a non-state or non-Syrian actor. Türkiye has been home for 3.5 million Syrian refugees since the conflict started. Already there's lines at the Turkish-Syrian border for Syrians to return to Syria from Türkiye. But there's also challenges with the Kurdish region in Türkiye or in Syria. It's important to note that in the Kurdish region, there are 900 US soldiers, and they're helping to ensure the enduring defeat of ISIS, working with Kurdish partners, which are also linked to the Turkish and also US designated terrorist organization, the PKK, or Kurdistan Workers Fighters. And it's also important to know that in this region of Syria is where the oil is, and also agriculture and water. So really the keys to the economy are going to be in the Kurdish region. And it will be key to see what type of alliance they have with the Kurdistan region within Syria. And also if they look to provide any type of, autonomous governing guarantees, which would be a red line for Türkiye. And Türkiye has supported HTS to a certain degree over these last few years. So it's unlikely that they would do something that would disrupt the balance with Türkiye. Many people are saying that HTS possibly is looking to make Syria into a Turkish-like state when you look at the secularism.
You mentioned those resources in the Kurdistan region, which seems like there is, we have an audience member who's asking a question now. Is it possible the Syrian Kurds are going to try to seize this opportunity to try to push for their own state?
We've already seen that happening, and they have support of many people in the US, including Senator Lindsey Graham came out with a statement saying if Turkish forces go into Syria and have an operation within the right now where the Kurds are, this would be something that's unacceptable for the US. So really one key factor to watch is where US soldiers will be, especially with the incoming Trump administration and Trump's statement that he wants to take the US out of Syria, and he will be pushed to do so by the Turkish forces and Turkish government. But I think a lot of his advisors and a lot of the people that he's nominated for key roles in his cabinet, as well as members of Congress, will be forcefully pushing back against that because they do see that the Kurds are an important partner for the US in the region.
Okay, I'm going to ask a little bit more about the U.S. response in a minute here, but first I'd like to ask you about some of the other neighbors, Iraq and the Gulf states. I wonder, for example, what the Gulf Cooperation the Gulf Cooperation Council is going to say in response to all of this, what their positions are going to be on this going forward. That seems to be crucially important given their ability to fund this or that priority of their own.
Absolutely. And the Gulf states have recently come to terms with Assad and made amends. He, for the first time, was at the Arab states meeting this year. And again, I think they were all surprised. There was a meeting in Doha a few days ago of foreign ministers saying that we think there should be a political solution, that Assad should reach out to his people. Nobody expected Damascus and Assad to fall so quickly. So certainly they're going to be looking for calm in the region. There's also warmer ties between Gulf states and Iran than there have been in the previous rendition of conflict in Syria. But ultimately, the Gulf states are also going to be looking at the ability for terrorist groups to regroup and how that will impact their countries, their economies, and refugee flows. But there is a willingness to support rebuilding efforts from the Gulf states, both for Syria and also for Lebanon.
I understand the chamber has a delegation in the Gulf right now, and I wonder, are things calm there? What's the read on the ground right now?
Yes, indeed. Our colleagues are in UAE right now for a space mission that my colleague, Vice President Steve Lutz of our region, is there, and things are calm. Also in Israel, I think there was more domestic political upheaval than right now international, with the prime minister taking trial for corruption charges. So things are relatively calm in the region as the Syrian situation takes place.
We just have another question coming in from one of our audience members saying the HTS has made statements similar to the ones that were made during the Iranian Revolution, during the establishment of an Islamic Republic. Do you anticipate HTS establishing a more religious state in Syria?
I think HTS is in a difficult position because on one hand, their fundamental support base is Islamist, but on the other hand, they need to appeal to a much broader segment of society in Syria. So it will be really key to see how they strike this balance. And there have been some indications, even within Idlib province over the last few months, that towing this line is not as easy as they may make it sound in their statements.
Well, let's pivot now to the U.S. response. I know that we would all want to celebrate the departure of a dictator, but it also, puts the United States in a rather difficult position, both the current administration and the incoming one, because this man is still on our terrorist list, right? The de facto leader of the country now, and the leader of HTS. I wonder what you see in the U.S. response going forward.
Yeah, I think the U.S. will certainly want accountability and want to see Syria bring Bashar al-Assad to justice. And the crimes against humanity have just been tremendous. About 500,000 people have died within the Syrian civil war. And these images from one of the most notorious prisons, Sedania, are just horrific. So I think the U.S. will certainly support Syrian efforts to bring justice and accountability. There's also some US citizens, specifically one journalist, Austin Tice, who people may remember from the headlines, who may still be in Syria.
Right.
So if he can resurface and if he's alive, that would be a huge bridge to opening up the US becoming a little bit more involved in this situation in a good way, to broker potentially some agreements with using carrots and sticks.
How do you anticipate the Trump administration is going to look at this, and what opportunities might they be seizing amid all of this diplomatic back and forth that we're going to be seeing in the weeks and months ahead?
So Syria is no stranger, and Trump is no stranger to Syria. He had a lot of these actions that really put in place the current U.S. position during his first administration. He secured the oil in the Kurdish, where the Kurdish forces are and the U.S. forces are, and that oil right now is being used to fund this Kurdish government that's in this part of the region. So certainly President Trump will be looking at what he does with the U.S. troops. He's already made statements that he does not think the U.S. has a role to play in Syria. But again, I think he's going to be facing pushback from his own cabinet members and members of Congress on this issue, while simultaneously being faced very assertive with President Erdogan and the Turks for the U.S. to get out. And it will also be key to watch what position ISIS has in all of this and what signs of ISIS reemerging there are. Within that region where the U.S. is, there are about 10,000 ISIS fighters that are being detained and their families. That's a sizable population, and what is done with those people is a big question. U.S. is working with Türkiye and others in the region for an anti-ISIS coalition, and so how much that coalition needs to reemerge will be telling based on ISIS actions.
Okay, if I'm an American business person who's got ongoing operation or thinking of new investments either in the Gulf region or in Israel or in Türkiye, what are the implications of these developments for my business portfolio?
Well, one thing to keep in mind is Syrian labor and Syria's contribution to the economies around the world. Because there have been more than 4.5 million Syrians in different countries around the world. Some of them are contributing to different labor forces, particularly in some agriculture fields or manufacturing. So if your company may have employed Syrian refugees, that could possibly change. And then also for the better, there could be eventually rebuilding efforts in Syria and different transit options if you're looking to trade from Türkiye, for example, into Lebanon or into the Gulf. So that's something to watch for. And then the overall risk is just terrorism and the rise again of ISIS.
Great. Well, Jennifer, I wonder if you might sum up for our audience what we should be watching for in the weeks and months ahead.
Sure. I think we need to watch for what type of statements HTS makes against Israel and Golan Heights, because this is going to be key to determine U.S. policy and how the U.S. will react in the region. Also to see what steps the new regime is going to be taking toward terrorist groups such as ISIS. And that will also be key to see the U.S.'s reaction and response. And then as we are transitioning to the Trump administration, how does the Trump administration look at this lesson and see a weakened Iran and a weakened Russia? And what does that mean for the balance of power to resolving conflicts such as Ukraine or in Gaza and future strikes on Iran and its nuclear capabilities?
All right, our audience has had their morning shot of informational espresso, so we'll leave it there and tackle the day. Let me thank Jennifer Miel, Vice President on the Middle East team here at the U.S. Chamber for Swinging Bites. Jennifer, thank you so much.
Sure, thank you so much.
If you'd like to reach out to our guest, please see her email under the resource bar at the bottom of your screen. And a warm thank you to you, our members, for joining us today. If you have a theme you would like us to cover, please feel free to reach out to us at the email on the screen, globalintel@uschamber.com. We are planning many shows in the coming weeks and months, and we welcome your suggestions and feedback. This has been The Call, brought to you by the Global Intelligence Desk of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, asking the right questions to navigate uncertain times.